Great. Welcome, everybody. We're here today for our Hook, Line, and Sinker Reeling in ArcGIS Webhooks webinar, and we're happy to see all of you here today. I guess we can get started with a couple intros here. So my name's Dan. I'm one of the technical support specialists at Save Software, and today I'm joined by...
My name's Sinai. I have a very similar role.
And my name's Matt. I'm on Sinai's team, but newer addition to the team.
Great, thanks team. And we also do have a team of experts in the back end this morning here, ready and available to answer any questions that you may have come up during the webinar. So definitely just a reminder to leave those in the questions panel as we go. And before we dive into things, I'll just do a quick intro to Livestorm if this is your first Livestorm webinar with us. If you do have any audio issues, we have that handy help button on the bottom left. Share your reactions with us during the webinar. We love to see them. And then there's also the questions tab on the bottom right. Ask your questions and upvote questions that are relevant to you. And then that helps us prioritize which ones to get to first. And then last but not least, the chat. Keep letting us know where you're tuning in from and share your comments with us there. I believe we also have a poll shortly that we'll bring up under that polls tab as well.
Great. And just a quick agenda of what we're going to be looking at today through our webinar. We're going to do a quick introduction to webhooks and, what webhooks are. We'll be looking at a quick flash demo to give you a preview of what we're going to be working with today and kind of a sneak peek. Then we'll dive into a bit of a Survey123 Webhooks demonstration and how you can use FME to empower that, as well as looking at Field Map and the webhooks there. And then we'll end off with some resources and some Q&A. So just a quick overview of our company, Safe Software, if you're not familiar with us. We've been around for over 28 years solving data challenges, and we're a leader in enterprise spatial data integration. So our mission is to help maximize the value of data and get all that data and have it performing to the best of its ability. We've got a very vibrant FME community where you can find lots of answers and ask questions and come up with new ideas. And with FME comes unrivaled data support. So over the years, we started out with GIS and CAD, and now we've moved up to, AI, VR. And with webhooks, really, you could be working with any of these different formats. So there's lots of possibilities of what you could be working with here. And a quick poll for everyone today is, what Esri web apps are you currently using? So I know we've already mentioned Field Maps, Survey123, there's also custom web apps, collectors, let us know in the polls.
Yeah, and then if you aren't using any, we do have an option for none at the moment as well. Maybe I'll ask our panelists here while we're waiting, what would you guys expect the most to be for our results today?
Collector seems to be quite a popular one, though maybe Survey123 is a close second.
Yeah, I think Collector and Survey123 are probably going to be the highest ones here, but we'll see what we get.
Yeah, not to be boring, but those would be my choices as well.
We're probably on to something then.
All right, awesome. Looks like most people have voted. Everyone can take a look at the results there on the bottom right under polls now.
Great. So a challenge faced by ArcGIS Online users is how to enrich, manipulate, and sync that ArcGIS Online data in near real time with other systems. Webhooks are a powerful tool to help address that challenge. So using webhooks, FMEs can run an automation within moments of an event occurring in ArcGIS Online. Webhooks provide that instant approach to be able to sync data faster and a little bit better than a typical data synchronization processes where you're potentially only viewing a snapshot of data in time. So I'm just going to go through a flash demo here of a water leak reporting example. So this is going to be a citizen in the city of Safeville, or fictional city, reporting a water leak outside of their property or a water leak they notice on the street using Safeville's Survey123 reporting app. and that's going to fire off a Survey123 webhook that will kick off an FME automation and create a feature in a work order ArcGIS Online feature service. And that feature service is going to be used by our Field Maps work orders application. And the creation of that feature fires another webhook, this time an ArcGIS Online webhook. That'll trigger another FME automation to notify the water department manager, who could then go into into Field Maps or into the ArcGIS Online web map and assign the work. And that update will trigger the same automation again. So I'm going to go through this now. Jump into Survey123. Hopefully my audio is not too glitchy. Apologize if it is. Just show you here in the settings for Survey123. I've already created this FME webhook, so we'll go into more details in this later in the webinar, but this is a URL pointing to our webhook trigger in our automation. And this is set up to trigger when new records are submitted. So I'm just going to back out here, and I'm going to submit a survey. Pretend I'm the citizen. To save some time, I defaulted all these fields. Essentially, the form is just the citizen's contact info, a description of the leak, and then they can put a pin on the map of where they found the problem. We'll submit that, and we'll see. Right after submitting, I'm going to hop into FME and go into this water leak reporting automation, which I'll come back to. If I go to the log file right away, you'll see in the log file, this is the raw data from the webhook. So we see the name of the person and the phone number, all the raw JSON data that was submitted with that Survey123 form. So it's very fast. And this automation fires off once it gets that webhook payload, fires off an FME desktop workspace that's going to create the create the feature in ArcGIS Online. So it looks like this. It gets the JSON data, does some fragmenting, and then creates a point geometry with attributes using that webhook data. It also enriches the data a bit to add some additional fields used for work order tracking. And then it writes that feature out to our ArcGIS Online work orders feature service. So the creation of that feature in ArcGIS Online actually fires another webhook, the one that I was showing earlier in the diagram. This one here, it's work order assignment. And so if I go look at the log file here, we'll see a very different looking payload's been received, because the Survey123 and the ArcGIS Online Webhooks function a little differently. But this payload has triggered our automation to send an email to the assignee that was determined in FME desktop. So if I just open up my email quickly just to prove that, I heard it ding in the background as I was talking. Just wanted to show the email that I received. This is sent by the automation. So we can see here's the fields that were added by FME desktop to the work order feature. And then we also have the original data that was emitted by Survey123 for reference. So our water manager could go into the web map, either in Field Maps mobile app, or for ease of demo, I'm going to just go into the Field Maps app on the browser here. And we can see the point geometry has been created by the automation running that first workspace I showed. Go in and edit this point. The fields at the top were added by the workspace, so we've enriched our data, and the fields lower down were copied over from the Survey123 form to form our work order. Could update this to assigned as notes. And update, and within another 20 or 30 seconds, I'll get another email. But I'll end it there, since we're having a bit of sound issues here that I apologize for, and I'll pass it back. But that's hopefully we were able to get I was able to get the gist of some of the power of webhooks through, and the instantaneous nature of them.
Thank you, Matt, for that flash demo. Now I just wanted to talk about some more reasons about why you should be using webhooks in the first place. So first off, if you're not already automating workflows between your applications, then you absolutely should be. FME allows you to connect multiple applications and data formats, with webhooks just being one of the tools available to do that. But as far as integration tools go, webhooks are a very lightweight option. They can connect between many systems without a lot of overhead. They require little to no custom coding or specialized knowledge, really, beyond this webinar. And they're really going to provide only limited access to each system, so they're quite a secure option as well. Lastly, webhooks deliver their data between systems nearly in real time. So that means that you can build automated workflows that respond to new data as it becomes available. And this has a huge benefit and allows for a lot of possibilities. And during this webinar, I definitely encourage everyone to maybe think about their own workflows, whether that is for processing data or maybe even work management, and how they might be automated with webhooks and FME Server. So what actually is a webhook? If you're familiar with REST API, you basically already know how webhooks work. Each communicate over the web using HTTP, but webhooks are much more simple. It's basically just a URL, and we use that URL in a post or GET request. And we can share that URL with another application that then can send data or event information to it. So what this means is that we no longer have to ask for that data from that application on a schedule or something like that. The other application can give us the data when it becomes available. And once we have that webhook connected to an FME server automation, we can set up a workflow to respond to that incoming event. So this is a lot like being able to hire a concierge for your data. It's a bit of a luxury. As soon as an event happens, it's taken care of. The webhook trigger makes it really easy to connect other applications to an FME automation. So every webhook trigger is going to supply a URL, and we can set up that URL in another application to send a message every time certain events happen. So our FME automation will then receive that message, and that automation workflow will be kicked off with the information contained in there. And the rest of that workflow is really going to be up to you. You can take that data, transform it, integrate it with another platform, send yourself a notification, maybe update a database. That's where the possibilities are really endless. So we just wanted to include a little primer on JSON in case you're not familiar with it, because we see a lot of it when we're working with webhooks or really any kind of web-based workflow. JSON is the most common data exchange format. And there's a little sample of it here. If you look past all of those brackets and colons and formatting, it's really just a dictionary that is describing the data. Both FME Server and Workbench have tools for extracting exactly what you need to know from that JSON. And inside of automations, we can parse JSON directly from webhook messages to use as parameters. And then inside of FME Workbench, we can do all kinds of JSON transformations to make that data usable. And we have a lot of tutorials for doing just that. So now that we're familiar with the fundamentals of webhooks, I'm happy to say that both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Portal support these kinds of workflows. The configuration and availability does differ between and within each platform, but what they share in common is that we can use webhooks to monitor activity on our hosted items, users, and groups. This makes webhooks a fantastic tool for administrators, technicians, analysts to integrate and transform all of the ArcGIS data and metadata, as well as building out these workflows for between applications and potentially administrative tasks as well. So let's jump into our first webhook demo, and we can look at a Survey123 webhook with Dan.
Thanks, Sinai. Yeah, so for our first demonstration here, we're going to be looking at how we can use Survey123 webhooks and how we can really enhance them with FME Server. So if you're not familiar, Survey123 is an ArcGIS platform that allows users to submit surveys either from their mobile device or their web device. And this could range from surveys sourcing data from the public, or it could be used internally within your organization. So the goal today with Survey123 Webhooks and FME is to sync data submitted through that Survey123 app to our SQL Server table and a Tableau dashboard. So some of the obstacles along the way, well, we don't really have a direct way to connect Survey123 data to our data destinations. So that's where our solution comes in place, which is FME automations and that webhook trigger that allows us to retrieve a webhook message and sync it to SQL Server and Tableau every single time a survey is submitted. The result is an always up-to-date data set and a dashboard for all the data submitted through the Survey123 app. And here's a quick overview of kind of the workflow that we're going to be working with today. So on the left, you can see we have our Survey123 app. And when the user submits a survey, it'll trigger a webhook payload that'll be sent to our FME automation through that webhook trigger. And that will kick off a workspace, which will then digest that webhook payload, extract the attributes from the JSON message, and then we'll have two ways of processing this data. So we'll be writing it out to our SQL Server table, and then we'll also be writing it out to our Google Sheets table, which will then be used to sync to our Tableau dashboard. So the first step towards achieving this is connecting Survey123 and FME. So Survey123 allows us to connect FME to our data every time a survey is submitted. So with FME automations, we can use the webhook trigger that Matt showed in our Flash demo and pick up that webhook message and expose it for further translations and transformations down the line. And once this is set up, then this becomes a fully automated approach. So I'm just going to share my screen and show FME how we have that set up. And what we're looking at here is our automation already built out. We've got our webhook here. This is our webhook trigger. And you can see it's produced a webhook URL. And now what we've done is we've copied this URL and we've gone into our Survey123 app that we've got set up here. And we've already added a webhook that's connecting to that URL. So you can see we have our payload URL. We've got it set up so that every time a new record is submitted, we're going to send through that data. And the next step to our workflow is processing that webhook response. So once that webhook trigger has been triggered and we receive that JSON message, we then need to extract the attributes from our webhook response using JSON fragmenter and more transformers. We also use the image fetcher to retrieve the images from the survey to then store those as a blob in our tables. We can then write that cleanup data to two locations, our SQL Server table and our Google Sheets table. And here's a little preview of what we can expect our workspace to do. So first we get that webhook JSON message, and it's a set of attributes and their values, kind of like key value pairs. And what FME is going to be doing is going to be processing those, extracting those attributes and their values, and we'll end up with the table on the bottom there. So we'll move over to our workspace here to show that off. First step in our workspace is to retrieve that message from our webhook trigger. So what we've got set up here is a parameter fetcher, and within this, we're retrieving a user parameter that we've set up that will retrieve that webhook feature. We'll then be processing that JSON using the JSON fragmenter and pulling out some of those attributes and the attachments, as well as the geometry. We'll then be using our image fetcher here to extract the image into a raster. We're going to see if it's a JPEG or a PNG, and then we're going to be using our raster extractor to turn this into a blob attribute. At the end here, we're going to be joining all our data back up together with the feature joiner. We'll do some quick cleanup with our attribute manager, such as removing some attributes that we don't need and reformatting. And then we'll be extracting some coordinates to output to our Google Sheets. And here you can see we have our Google Sheets writer, as well as our SQL Server writer. So some of the tips and tricks that we were just showing off there in our workspace is that we can use the JSON fragmenter to easily take that JSON message and extract attributes and their values. It's also important to remember that you need to use that parameter fetcher to actually retrieve the webhook message. Otherwise, it's not going to be available to your workspace. And if you are going to be using the image fetcher, we do need to authenticate it with an ArcGIS Online web connection. Otherwise, we won't be able to retrieve that image as a raster. The last step here is going to be connecting up our automation. So all we have to do is add a action to our automation canvas, and we can set it to a run a workspace action that will run that workspace that I just showed. And that workspace will already be published up to our server. And so that every time a webhook message comes through, it's triggering off that workspace, and that will write out to our two tables. So I'll just show that quickly. And you can see I have that action here to run a workspace. We've got the workspace set up here. We've got our connections for our Google Sheets table and our SQL Server. And you can see here we have our webhook feature set up so that this is basically what's coming into the parameter fetcher. So every time a webhook message comes through, it's sending it through this user parameter. And at this point, we can start our automation. So every time we submit a survey, our results will be processed through that workspace. Our last step here is that we want to also integrate with those BI tools. So with FMC, we were outputting our data to Google Sheets. And depending on which business intelligence platform you're using, it might depend which format you're outputting your data to. It could be Excel. It could be, to another SQL database that your business intelligence tool is able to read. The possibilities are endless with all the formats available to you. And next, I'm just going to show off our kind of the survey conjunction with Esri and seeing all of that run at once. So let's go back to our screen share here. And we've already got a survey in Survey123 filled out. So this is a utilities reporting app. So users can report issues within their city, and all that data will get put out to our SQL Server table, as well as our Tableau dashboard that will allow the analysts at the city to easily view all the data being submitted. So we've got an urgency of the issue, we've got a description, we've got our location here, and we've got an image attached, as well as our date. So we'll just check that our automation is running, and it is. So we'll submit that survey. And now that that's submitted, we can go into our automation. We'll take a look at our log. And you can see that our workspace was just triggered. And that's just running in the background right now. All right, so now that we have our results in our Google Sheets, we can go to our Tableau dashboard. And you can see we have, just a basic dashboard set up here. We've got a map of all our submissions, as well as a table view, and the total number of reports sorted by urgency. So if I just go to our data and refresh our data set, you should see that we now have a critical urgency report in there, and that's the new one we just submitted. So you can see the location in our map here, and that's what we submitted through our Survey123 app. So yeah, with the power of FME and Survey123, you're able to connect your webhooks so that every time a survey is submitted, FME runs that workspace, processes that data, and is able to output it to your different tables or destinations.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As Dan said, we're going to pivot to a different type of webhook, one that you can use in ArcGIS Online with their other web applications offerings, including Field Maps. So ArcGIS Field Maps is a highly customizable and comprehensive mapping application from Esri. It allows those in the field to easily access and edit and collect data from their mobile devices. It's pretty comprehensive and puts a lot of the functionality that exists between the separate web applications into one place. As you know, there are many types and ways to make a web application in ArcGIS, and they're completely customizable. You may be familiar with some of these on this list. The point of many of these applications are to allow end users to access the feature services underneath them. So feature services are our points, lines, polygons, and other types of features hosted on our ArcGIS platforms. And the best part is we can set up a webhook directly on that feature service to listen for different kinds of events. So if a user adds or edits a point, maybe they upload an attachment, we can be notified the moment or nearly close to the moment that it happens. And that information is sent directly to FMEs. And as we kind of mentioned before, webhooks may differ within each platform. So the feature service webhook functions a little bit differently than Survey123. So instead of sending the event information directly inside the webhook message, like we saw in Dan's demo, a feature service webhook message provides a URL. So it ends up being a multi-step process to extract the event data from the webhook message. But we here at SAFE, we're always interested in automating a workflow. So we've built a custom transformer for extracting that event information from that URL. And it even conveniently sorts it into adds, updates, and deletions. And just want to give a shout out to Matt on this webinar for making this transformer even more awesome. And we're going to be using this transformer in our next demo. So this demo, we'll be using the feature service webhook to solve a pretty common problem. The applications and people responsible for different parts of a workflow are separated and the data isn't communicating between those systems. So we have a work team maybe using one application to collect data, and we have another team that needs to access that data in a separate application in order to do their work. So the challenge is, how do we carry that data from one application to another and let the right people know when it's available? Often we might spend a lot of our own time doing this kind of administrative management work, but in this demo, we're going to automate the entire process with a feature service webhook. So let's dive right in. So here is our hosted web mapping application in ArcGIS Online. And all these little points on the map here, they're just tracking invasive weeds, which may be just a menace to our own gardens, but they can actually be very devastating to agriculture and crops. So our work crew is using this layer in Field Maps to collect and identify invasive plants. And this data needs to be shared with another team that is responsible for their removal. So to do this, we will set up a feature service webhook on this map. Let's pivot over to FME to view our automation. This is our FME automation that will receive the event data from that feature service to this webhook trigger here. And we will follow the webhook trigger with a workspace that ingests the data and submits it to the correct team member in our work order system. Finally, our last step is entirely optional, but we're going to send a notification to that employee responsible for completing that work. So just like in Survey123, our webhook trigger actually provides the URL that we can share with ArcGIS Online. However, setting up the feature service webhook is a bit different than in Survey123. Back in ArcGIS Online, we can access our feature service from our web mapping application. And this is the feature service that contains all of our points that our field crew is collecting. And if we scroll to the bottom, we can access more settings for this layer. You just start by selecting admin, and you must have permissions to access these settings. And once you're into admin, you can scroll to the bottom and select webhooks. Now here is where you can create and manage all of your existing webhooks. I've already created one, so let's take a look at what it looks like. I'll open up the edit page. So we just have to give our webhook a name, and then we can tell ArcGIS Online what kinds of changes that we want to track. So this is all in the documentation for webhooks, which we can share with the audience. But essentially, you're given different options for different kinds of activities that we want event data sent to FME server for. So in this case, I'm only interested in getting information on which features are being created and updated. And in our next part here, the hook URL, this is how we connect this webhook to FME server. So you might recognize this URL. What it's doing is connecting directly to this automation here. And this is the URL that I've copied from our automation and pasted it here so that they're able to communicate. The rest of this webhook configuration is just setting up the content type. This looks a little bit more REST API if you're familiar with those, but you can essentially leave these default. To learn more about the details of setting up a webhook on a feature service, we can share out the tutorial for a step-by-step guide. So now that we've configured our feature service webhook, ArcGIS will send a message to this automation for every new feature created and updated. Our trigger here will then pass that webhook payload into our workspace action. So let's take a look at that workspace that follows our webhook trigger message to get an idea of the type of things that we can do with our webhook data. So here we are in FME Workbench, and we'll just walk through this workspace at a very high level. But we start this workflow by passing the payload into the ArcGIS Online Data Getter. Now, this is the custom transformer that we mentioned before. And you can see just how simple it is to use. We just need to use our web connection to ArcGIS Online, as well as pass in the value for that webhook payload. And what it does is it returns all of the updates from that URL that the webhook provides in adds, updates, and deletions. And you might recognize this as JSON formatting. And we know now that we can easily handle all of our JSON objects with our JSON transformers in FME Workbench. We've flattened out that webhook message into attributes that we can now use and pass on to our different systems. So in our next step here, we're just comparing the point that our field crew has collected, and we're comparing that point to some of our county shape files that we might host somewhere else. And we're just doing this in order to determine its jurisdiction. So we'll do that with a spatial filter and assign it a location on our county map. And then once we have that spatial information, we're able to find out which employee is responsible for that area by joining our point to the employee management database. And again, this might be hosted on another separate database, or maybe it's in a REST API. The point is we can take that point and it's been enriched, and now we can find out who's actually responsible for removing that weed. In our last step, we want to submit that now to our work order management database. We know who's responsible, we know where the point is, and we can now create a work order for the next steps in the workflow. And we will again write that to a database on another system, and we can connect to databases with a database connection in FME Workbench. The final and optional step here is to build a notification for that person responsible for carrying out the work. And how we do that is using just an HTML report generator. This will create a message for us that has some nice editing, that kind of thing. And we can pass that message as well as the employee contact information that we pulled from the database in previous steps and pass it back into the automation so that we can send out that notification. So essentially what we've done is just in a few steps and a few seconds of processing, we're going to connect our submitted points to other data sets in other databases or files stored elsewhere to give it context, and then we're going to synchronize that information across systems. Now, just to recap, we're going to run through this workflow. We're going to submit a point in our web map. The webhook trigger will ingest it, pass it on to our workspace. which will then assign it to the correct employee and submit a work order for that employee. Lastly, we put in our email body and the employee contact information into an email action so that they can be notified of that new work. All that's left to do is try it out. So let's go over to our web map. And let's pretend that we are collecting a point from Field Maps on our mobile device. So I'll just zoom right in and drop a new feature. Just add some values here. Let's say there's some weeds on the front lawn. And once I create that point, it may take a few moments for it to reach our automation. And that's configurable actually within the webhook. So once we've submitted that point, what we can do is take a look for its arrival in our automation log file. And we can see here we have some events being recorded. And this is our webhook message incoming from ArcGIS Online. And what we can see here is our service name. So there's our feature service. And then we have that URL that contains information about those changes. So after that, our automation runs that workspace and sends out our email to the employee responsible. So if I check my inbox, now we see we have a new email for that work order that we just submitted from our web application. Okay, so that kind of shows you how you can connect a feature service to other applications, enrich that data, transform it, send out notifications, whatever you'd like, using webhooks and FME automations. We submitted that point from just a web mapping application in ArcGIS Online, but that would work in exactly the same way if you have employees using Field Maps, Collector, Quick Capture, those kind of applications as well. Okay, so just to recap some tips and tricks from that demo, just some things to keep in mind. Some of it is more administrative. Others are just things that might make your life a little bit easier. In order to set up a webhook, your ArcGIS Online account must have permissions to the administrative settings on that feature service. You also have to configure some settings to make sure that edits can be tracked on that feature service. Again, refer to our tutorial just which settings need to be updated. Please do feel free to download that ArcGIS Online Webhook data getter from the FME Hub. That's going to make your life a lot easier. We're going to be able to pull the changes out of that URL automatically. And lastly, webhooks in ArcGIS Online and Portal are not just limited to feature services. You can listen for all kinds of events, including user activity, group activity, administrative changes, that kind of thing. Definitely look into those if that's something that might be useful to you. We've covered a lot today. I hope it was informative and useful. Definitely, if you have access to ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Portal, please take some of our tutorials or watch this webinar back and set up those workflows on your own feature services or web mapping applications. Webhooks really allow you to take your ArcGIS Online data and extend it to other platforms, do all sorts of cool things. Feature updates are, again, just one type of event workflows you can look for. Definitely check the documentation for more options. Next steps, if you're not already using FME, please head to our website, safe.com/support/demos, and download your free trial. Take some of these tutorials that we'll share in the following slides and customize them to your own workflows, and let us know what you're up to, post to the community, or just give us a shout. We'd love to see what you're up to. And here are some of those resources. We have some videos for doing webhooks in both Survey123 and Field Maps. And then following there are those articles and blog posts for more information.
Awesome. Thanks, Sinai. From here, I'll take over the screen share and share out just a few more resources here. So if you are getting started with FME, we recommend checking out the FME Accelerator course. It's a free 90-minute workshop. We also have an ebook on spatial data for the enterprise and more upcoming webinars. So safe.com/webinars. Definitely check that out. And if you are a part of our FME community, we do have a community badge code to redeem today. I just chatted out the link in the code for today. If you aren't yet a part of the community, we encourage you to check it out. It's a great place to network with other users alike and get tips and tricks to any challenges you might be having. And the FME UC, so just a quick shout out here. It's happening September 5th to 7th. It's the largest FME user conference yet, and we plan for over 100 sessions. All right, so now I'll invite our panelists to come on stage with me, and we'll take a look through the questions panel. Shout out to everyone. Thank you so much for all your questions that have come in today. It's been a busy Q&A, so just bear with us a moment while we begin to sift through these awesome questions. Thanks, everyone. All right, team, is there any in particular we want to get started with here today?
Lots of questions, which is great. There's been several around ArcGIS Enterprise webhooks, so I'm trying to answer those. Just a heads up that what we demonstrated today is ArcGIS Online Webhooks, which have been around for a while now. ArcGIS Enterprise Feature Service Webhooks are very new to Esri ArcGIS Enterprise. They just came out of beta in 11.1. So you would need, the latest and greatest version of ArcGIS Enterprise to use them. ArcGIS Enterprise did support administrative webhooks. So if we're doing things like getting notified if someone shared a layer or something like that, but nothing in terms of firing a webhook for someone adding a feature to a feature service. So that is new, and that is something we're working on articles for, and something that we'll have, I believe, another webinar later this year on.
Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and spoil. It's coming this July, and you can join the 4 of us again for that webinar. Yeah, and that'll be online in the next few days, so definitely keep an eye out for that webinar.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the configuration on the FME flow side of things for enterprise webhooks will look the same. Once you know how to set up an automation that receives a webhook on FME, you can configure that with any application that has webhooks. So our webinar will go over how they're configured on the enterprise side of things, but if you've watched this webinar, you pretty much already know how the FME side of things are going to look.
Any others we might want to pick out next here?
There's a couple questions about just what platforms you need for or applications you need on the FME side of things for working with webhooks. And these workflows do rely on FME flow to receive the webhook message. So the automations that we created in those examples, those are all on FME Flow, which is our automation platform. It's web-based and can receive these webhook messages. The workspaces that process and receive the webhook message, process the webhook message once it's received by FME Flow, those were built on Form, formerly our desktop, FME desktop product. So you do need both components in order to work with webhooks.
There's a couple questions about the CORS headers from Survey123. I don't know if Matt or Sanai, you're familiar with that, but if we don't have an answer right now, I know we can. I mean, we have our upcoming webinar, so that's something we can also look at that we'll come back to as well. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it myself, so I unfortunately don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, it sounds kind of familiar. I'll have to go and look in my old cases. I think this has come up before, but with proxies, you may have to add some exceptions to your FME Flows proxy configuration in order to receive a webhook from another application over the web. So yeah, we can follow up with a more detailed answer, but that might be the first place that I start if I was to troubleshoot an issue like that.
I'm not too sure on that one myself. Yeah, there was a good question around, does your FME Flow instance have to be accessible, internet accessible to use webhooks? And the answer is yes. ArcGIS Online needs to be able to communicate with your FME Flow server. to be able to send that, or to be able to hit that webhook URL in the webhook trigger in FME Flow.
Thanks, Matt.
And I see there's a little off topic, but there's a question about CityWorks webhooks. Yeah, we do work with those quite a bit. We have articles on that as well, and we do have training coming up to do with that. So, I mean, if you're interested, that's a great place to learn about it. Yeah, just kind of plugging that a little bit, a little off topic, but it's always kind of on the same theme of webhooks. You know, whatever you learn with that, you'll be able to use with the Survey123 and any ArcGIS webhooks. So it's good to know about.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And I'll just add that we do have a webinar that has some examples using CityWorks webhooks that was put on, I think, a few months ago in conjunction with some folks from the CityWorks team. So definitely check that out if you want to see some demos.
Yeah, I'll dig up that link and drop it in the chat here in case anyone is interested. All right. Any other questions here that we haven't? I know we've chatted about course headers, so I'll mark this one as answered or addressed. Any others that we might want to address here this morning, team, before we wrap up?
Just taking a quick read through everything. Lots of great questions today. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
For other applications, there is a question too about if webhooks can be set up directly on a database, and that is possible. In the question panel, I shared a article that we've published for configuring a webhook on a SQL Server database, but we also have tutorials for Oracle and Postgres. They're set up a little bit differently because you have to just create a quick function that can send a web-based message to FME Flow, but in the workflow, they basically look the same. Whenever an edit or an update is made on your database table, it can send a message to FME Flow. So yeah, there's more applications for webhooks.
Avi had a good question. How are missed webhooks handled? So say you had a network outage or your server went down and your FME Flow server went down and someone was adding features to Survey123, for example, via webhooks. They are asynchronous. It's just a one-way communication. So, and once they're fired off, if essentially the listener isn't listening, it's gone. That doesn't necessarily mean your data is gone, because if someone's edited a feature, you'd still have that data in ArcGIS Online. But yeah, that webhook is not going to be, you can't really re-trigger it unless that feature gets edited or added. If that's a real concern, you need high availability, you might want to look more at like a queuing solution, a message broker, something like Kafka, where intermediary messages can be stored. And FME does have many different listeners for different brokers and message queues. Kafka, MQTT, RabbitMQ. There's a whole bunch. Sorry, Sinai.
No, that's great. I was just going to say another way you could get around that is to consider your FME Flow deployment. There's lots of options for different configurations there. So if you have FME Flow, you might want to consider creating a fault-tolerant deployment. So fault tolerance allows you to prepare for downtime or communication errors or anything that might interrupt your workflows, so that we always have FME Flow up and running and able to receive messages or do critical processing. That's another option there.
Awesome. All right, it looks like we're all wrapped up now. Just final call to the team in case I'm missing anything.
Very quickly, a question just came in regarding, does FME Flow need to be installed on the same machine as ArcGIS Enterprise? That's a question that comes up a lot in support. The answer is it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're just receiving webhooks from, say, Survey123, and say you were taking that JSON data and wanted to write it out to Spatialite or a non-Esri format, then no.
But if you are wanting to take that webhook JSON and write it out to an Esri format that requires Esri licensing, then yes, you would need ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Server actually installed on the same machine as Flow to be able to get the license. Like if you wanted to write to an SDE database or something, for example.
Excellent. All right, so with that, I just want to give a huge thank you to our team of panelists here this morning for creating this content. And thank you to our whole audience for joining us here today. If you do have a moment to fill out our webinar survey, we really appreciate any feedback. It's just a few multiple choice questions, and I just dropped the link in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, you'll see it there. And yeah, thank you, everyone. We hope that you have an awesome rest of your days ahead. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Take care.